books and arts.
Theatre Review. Musical Diplomacy. Patriotism on Broadway. Why everyone wants to see Hamilton.
Live theatre is an artisanal art form. Even a big show serves at most 2,000 people at a time, which seems almost quaint in this era of viral cultural phenomena. Many people never hear about acclaimed productions being performed on their own doorstep, much less works that may be earning praise overseas. Yet for some reason, nearly everyone, from New York to Nottingham, is talking about Hamilton. A musical about America's first Treasury Secretary does not sound like obvious material for a blockbuster. A hip-hop score and largely non-white cast would seem to guarantee it a place in the cultural margins. But tickets to Hamilton have been well-nigh impossible to get since its off-Broadway premiere in January. Near-universal critical acclaim and an insatiable public ensured a quick transfer to the Richard Rodgers Theatre on Broadway in August, where it is now sold out for the next 10 months. Other cities want to get their hands on the show. Chicago will have its own production next September. Cameron Mackintosh is working on bringing Hamilton to London in 2017. At a time of bitter political polarisation, this musical even enjoys a rare consensus. President Barack Obama, who has seen it twice, said finding it brilliant may be the only thing that Dick Cheney and I have agreed on during my entire political career. Why are so many people so giddy about Hamilton? Part of the show's appeal is its subject. The story of America's first bureaucrat is almost too good to be true. Born illegitimate and raised in squalor in the Caribbean, Alexander Hamilton arrived in New York in 1773 as a penniless orphan with little more than a sharp pen, good looks, and a chip on his shoulder. Yet he restlessly worked his way up to become an essential player in the Revolutionary War and one of America's founding fathers. As George Washington's right-hand man, he helped create the new government, churned out elegant essays defending its constitution, which are still frequently cited in the Supreme Courts today, and invented much of the machinery that would keep it all humming, such as a public debt, a central bank, and a coast guard. But the fearless ego and stubborn pride that fueled his rise also ensured his fall, at the hand of Aaron Burr, the vice president, on a dueling ground in Weehawken, New Jersey, when he was just 49. It is a sexy tale, and one that has been overshadowed by other stories of the period. Hamilton had a more lasting impact on the country than many of his peers, but he also had a gift for making powerful enemies, many of whom went on to become president. Hamilton's role in the nation's first political sex scandal kept him out of the office. This tarnished his record and obscured his legacy. Before this year, few Americans registered that it is his handsome face on the $10 bill. On December 11th, a proposal to replace Hamilton was delayed by the Treasury Secretary, in part because of pressure from the musical's fans. Yet Hamilton is no mere history lesson. The thrill of this show, beautifully directed by Thomas Kail, is the way it makes events that happened centuries ago feel as fresh and as relevant as the political debates that are taking place today. In the hands of Lin-Manuel Miranda, its 35-year-old writer, composer and charismatic star, the story of this daring immigrant made good becomes the story of America, a country that is still as young, scrappy and hungry as the brash revolutionaries who rolled up their sleeves to help build it. Some of this vitality can be put down to casting. Unlike most stories about America's intrepid first steps as a country, Hamilton resembles much of the nation as it is now. All of those dead white men and women have been energetically reincarnated by an excellent cast of mostly African-American and Latino actors. At a stroke, the show reasserts the way America has always been a nation of striving immigrants and outsiders, and that the country's story is the property of all Americans, even those whose ancestors may have started out as property themselves. Even more remarkable is the music, which harmonises several worlds that rarely collide: 18th century history, musical theatre and hip-hop. When Mr. Miranda first proposed his plans to combine his unlikely passions, few believed he could pull it off. Although he had won a Tony for his first hip-hop-inflected musical, a semi-autobiographical tale called In the Heights, about life in a Puerto Rican neighbourhood in New York, his vision for this show was far more ambitious. Ron Chernow, whose vivid 800-page biography of Hamilton provided the inspiration and is back on bestseller lists 11 years later, says he was flabbergasted when Mr. Miranda first told him that a hip-hop musical kept flying off the page. Daveed Diggs, an accomplished rapper who largely steals his scenes as Lafayette in the first act and Jefferson in the second, concedes he was sceptical too. It's tricky enough to accurately depict history without seeming didactic or corny, he explains. But with hip-hop, if it isn't authentic, it doesn't work. Yet both of them, and many others, swiftly climbed aboard the moment they heard Mr. Miranda perform what would become the first number of the show. Now sung by Burr, the silky-voiced Leslie Odom Jr., who jealously narrates Hamilton's rise, its rhythmic poetry immediately announces a new voice for the stage. How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore, and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by Providence, impoverished, in squalor, grew up to be a hero and a scholar? You're hearing rhyming couplets and quatrains. It's really quite extraordinary, says Mr. Chernow, who adds that he was stunned when he heard the first 40 pages of his book compressed into a catchy 4-minute song. He swiftly agreed to be a historical advisor throughout the project. After Mr. Miranda, the son of a political activist, performed a version at the White House in 2009, Mr. Obama leapt to his feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. Rap and hip-hop have been around for 40 years, but in Hamilton, many are discovering it for the first time. Some have been surprised to learn that this musical form is all about lyrical dexterity, about elevating vernacular speech into rhyming, rapid-fire verse. This makes it uniquely well-suited for conveying masses of information as succinctly and cleverly as possible, particularly useful when presenting a man who published over 27 volumes of writing. Mr. Miranda's Hamilton says more than anyone in Shakespeare other than Hamlet. For example, a cabinet's debate between Hamilton and Jefferson over whether to establish a national bank is presented as a rap battle, with Hamilton arguing, "A new line of credit, a financial diuretic, how do you not get it? If we're aggressive and competitive, the union gets a boost. You'd rather give it a sedative?" Against all expectations, it feels natural for these characters to talk this way, despite their period costumes. Mr. Miranda pulls this off by supplying them with perfectly chiselled lyrics that are dramatic, erudite, and cool all at once. They pulse with internal rhymes and reveal ever more detail each time you listen to them. A perfectionist, he worked at these songs for 6 years and was still tinkering after the show opened on Broadway. The fact that I can go to Lin at intermission with an idea about a line and he can come up with a better one and then perform it an hour and a half later is the great gift of Lin-Manuel Miranda, says Mr. Cale. The music, richly orchestrated by Alex Lacamoire, is packed with references to the hip-hop soundtrack of Mr. Miranda's youth. A number about a dueling protocol, called 10 Duel Commandments, for example, offers a playful nod to the notorious B.I.G.'s tips on drug dealing, the 10 Crack Commandments. But these songs, which also draw from jazz, R&B, and the soaring ballads of Stephen Sondheim and Andrew Lloyd Webber, are easily enjoyed on their own merits. The cast recording, released digitally in September, is the first to top the charts as both a Broadway cast album and a rap album. It has also won millions of fans who may never reach Broadway, but who can at least find each other on social media. Rolling Stone, the San Francisco magazine, recently named it one of the best albums of the year. Yet there is something about this moment that has made this show feel especially relevant. Unlike many of the biggest Broadway musicals of the 21st century, such as The Book of Mormon, Spamalot, and The Producers, Hamilton is performed with utter sincerity. It presents a portrait of America's founders that showcases their brilliance, but acknowledges their flaws. Jefferson was a clever tactician, but also a preening showboat. Hamilton had serious skill with a quill, yet he could also be a self-destructive windbag. The country's politics were always a messy business, full of personal grievances, selfish ambition, and rabble-rousing invective. As Christopher Jackson's wise Washington says, "Winning was easy, young man. Governing's harder." These were not philosopher kings working in some golden age, but imperfect men who still managed to forge a new country out of hard work, compromise, and a shared vision of democratic principles. This is an optimistic message. At a time when Americans have been pondering big questions about who they are and what their country is, who is served and who gets to belong, Hamilton offers a welcome chance to feel patriotic about how it all began and where it might still go. It also presents a more inclusive, more multicultural vision of what America always was and what it should be. Just as every generation brings a new set of rebels who are moved to rise up against injustice, every age must bring its own compromises for getting things done. The country will always be a work in progress, a great unfinished symphony, in the words of Mr. Miranda's Hamilton. As Americans struggle to compose the next few bars, some are finding inspiration in the notes coming from Broadway.